Hello, this is Brian from Tavarin Games, coming back with another update on Dungeon Maker. So, of course, the first announcement I have to make is Dungeon Maker is now available on Steam as an early access version. So, if you're interested in checking out Dungeon Maker, you can head to Steam. I'm charging $10 US for it, $11.50 Canadian, for the early access version. And right now, this is pretty up to date. There's a few features I've been working on since I've gotten the game up, but I am updating it and adding builds on once I've tested them and got them ready. So please, if you're interested, check out Dungeon Maker on Steam. As well, if you join my Patreon and support me through that, I will happily send you a Steam key to Dungeon Maker so that you can get your copy and use it in-game. So let's just run this, and you can see that it is indeed functioning. Pop that up. And here we are. So Dungeon Maker pops up, and there it is. So we're actually not, though, going to be using the Steam version to show you the new features I've been working on today. So let's quit that, and let's go to my build I'm working on and open this up. So this is the latest build, working on this up to this afternoon and fixing some things. But yeah, so the new features I want to show you are all in the map maker. So let's go into the map maker. Now, I actually made a test map for us for YouTube, and you can see it's blank. The first thing to discuss is when we now click the exit to menu button, a confirmation window now comes up. So you can cancel and that just disappears, or you can save and exit so that your map data is saved, or you can just exit, which if you've made changes to a map and you realize you hate them, but it would be a lot of work to undo them, you can just hit the exit button. So we'll stay, though, in this screen, and we'll look at these two new buttons down here first. So the first one we'll look at is my Generate Random Map button. So let's just use these default settings and confirm that and check it out. So you can see when we do that, we get a random map of just floors and walls for now. But it's a bunch of internet-connected rooms that all connect to each other through various hallways and doorway or openings that you could then put doors in, and you could furnish this. And there's a bunch of different settings we can change to affect that. So let's go through that. So the approximate size is the rough number of rooms it's going to try to generate. So let's crank that up, add an extra few, and you can see we end up this time with more rooms. Now let's turn that back down just so it goes a little faster. If we make the rooms bigger, so 15 to 10, it's going to try to make sure the rooms are between these sizes. So we confirm that, and you can see we now have bigger rooms, and some of them end up a little further apart. Some other settings we have, so let's turn that back down. We can change the types of walls. So let's say we go to a cave. Maybe the cave has stone pebbles as the ground type. We're going to talk about some of these later, but let's make it a bit more spaced out. So this is the density is how far apart each room it tries to generate is, basically the minimum distance between them. The room offset is how off-center they are. So if the room offset is set to centered, when one room tries to generate the next, it's always going to try to generate directly off its center point and have the center points of each room meet each other. Whereas if we set this to offset, it can push that room, if it's above, it can push that room to the left or right, the same thing with below, up to basically the width of this room. So the center point of the room above ends up at the edge of the room it came from. And then for left and right, the same is true for how far up and down it can go. So let's leave offset on because it makes for some interesting things, and let's do rounded corners, and we'll see what that does. So here is kind of a cave system with a bunch of separate rooms or openings that are a little more spaced out. With the rounded corners, you can see it just slightly rounds off the corner by deleting this outside wall where that would be, and instead placing it here inside in the corner. So for big rooms, it's not super round, but it's a starting point, and then you could clean it up a bit, change things up by moving the walls around as you like. So some other features. So firstly, let's change up the type. I really like the wattle and daub with oak floor. I think that looks quite nice. So one other thing we have is symmetrical. So when it's trying to generate a symmetrical map, and let's go back to higher density. With a symmetrical map, it actually draws the map, and then it counts from the right side to the left and finds the halfway point of all of the floors and walls placed. And then it deletes everything to the left of that, and then it takes everything on the right and it mirrors it and creates new objects to the left that are an exact mirror and therefore perfectly symmetrical. So here's our first one. Now, because of where the center point ends up, sometimes you'll end up with a bit of wall or a detached room. That can happen. But you end up with a symmetrical map. So let's say you're doing a castle or a person's manor where they would have symmetry. This can give you a really cool starting point to sort of get you a layout that you can then add furnishing to, add doors to, change it up. So we're getting some kind of funky maps when we do this, but every time, as you can see, it's going to be a completely different map. Now with the symmetrical, the number of rooms is going to really vary from the size you specify here, just because however many rooms end up on one half and their sizes will really determine the shape more than anything. So we wanted 10 rooms, but we end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rooms instead. It happens, and we might end up with more, like this one. Has more than 10 rooms. I think that's 12. But yeah, and then finally the other one we have is this spiral pattern. So let's do that. And it's going to start and try to generate a spiral. Now, depending on the settings, you may or may not be able to really see the spiral pattern of it, because when it's generating a room, it tries to make sure they don't overlap. So let's put the settings in so that it 100% generates a perfect spiral. So there you go. So it would start here and generate a spiral around. Now these are all joined up, so let's actually space those out a little bit. Let's turn this to sprawling. And there you go. You can see the spiral pattern. If we add more rooms to that, it will then generate around. Now, in the case of the random map generator, if it goes over the object count of 7,000, it will try again a couple of times. It'll try 3 times to generate something less than 7,000 so that it is within the map tolerance size. And then if it might give up. If it gets over 7,000 3 times in a row, it will then just leave you with that map. Because yeah, if we change up the settings a lot, so if we generate like 30 rooms, 30 large rooms that are sprawling, see right there, it ends up like, when it does that, it ends up way over the object count. And it can't make less than the object count because the settings you gave it force it into that many tiles. At which point it'll show this in red, which is a new change, just to let you know, hey, you should probably change up the map settings because this map is too big to be transferred over multiplayer. Okay, so the other thing I did is a random town option, which I have been working on recently. It's not 100% complete, but let's put in the default settings and see what it does. Here we are. So with the default settings, we tried to generate a densely packed town with relatively small buildings, and it tries to make 12 of them. And here we are. So we have 12 somewhat small buildings and a road network sort of connecting them. So the way this function's working is it's taking the desired number of buildings and dividing that by the density. So if you want this really dense, the density is set to 1. And what that means is that in every plot of land it creates, it puts a building there. If the density goes lower, so we set it to more spaced out, so say it's 0.75, that means there's a 0.75% chance that each plot of land will have a building. So what it's first doing is it's taking the number of buildings and then checking your density, so spaced or sprawling. Sprawling is a 0.5% chance. And it's dividing them to come up with a number of plot of lands it roughly needs to do that. So let's say we have we want to make 10 buildings, and then we set a density to sprawling. So that means there's a 0.5% chance each plot will have building. Well, that's going to then give you the number 20. It's going to need 20 plots of land with each one with a 50% chance to give you roughly 10 buildings. Now, because of the odds, that number will, of course, vary. But if we do that, it's going to just take a second. So in this case, we ended up with fewer, but see how they're more spaced out. So what it then does, so it has that number, so in this case it was 20. It then figures out what is a rectangle that is slightly wider than it is tall, the minimum rectangle that can fit that number of buildings. So in the case of 20, that's 5 plots wide and 4 plots tall. That's the minimum rectangle wider than it is tall that can fit that number of buildings. If we go back to the original settings of 12 and dense one, where it is exactly 12, we have 12 plots. Well, the size would be 4 by 3. And it tries to fit it in. So if we set this to 9, it's going to end up as a 3 by 3. And then what it does is it randomly draws roads between those building plots. So if you look at this 3 by 3 grid, we have 9 building plots in this density one. It's going to draw roads between. And when it's drawing those roads, it randomly decides whether a road is going to appear in horizontally starting from the left or the right in each of those spots, and it randomly picks left or right, and or neither for horizontal, and same in vertical, top or bottom, or neither between the plots. And then once it decides that, it starts drawing the roads, and you can specify if you want the roads to draw completely straight, like this, and you can see they're in new locations now, or you can have them be really bendy, in which case we're going to have a lot more curves, and that messes up some of the buildings too, and they don't always place right. But it's drawing that, and then what it's doing is it puts in building plots as best it can fit them between those roads. So let's make the buildings a little bigger and go back to 12. So there's a little more space between each plot, which works better for the bendy roads. In this case, it did not generate very many roads. And then once it's drawn out that road network, it then puts a small version of each building in between, or in each of those plots, and then draws out sort of the biggest square it can fit in the space between the roads, and that's the maximum building size. It then tries to place a building in that between the minimum size and the maximum size it can reach, sometimes cutting off a corner to make these L-shaped buildings, and then draws them all one by one and presents you with the map. Now, in this case, when it goes over the object count, it doesn't try to redraw it. With the towns, it's filling in the whole space. So some settings really are always going to be over the object count. So you might have to just limit the size of your town and then just make multiple separate maps and have the players then be able to go between those different maps using the campaign map if you want to make cities or larger towns. But yeah, this is, again, like the random map generator, meant to be a starting point. So it's not generating doors or furniture or windows or anything. I haven't figured out how to do that yet. But right now, this would give you a starting point, and then you could go in and add furniture and add everything you want, and make all these buildings a little more unique or change their shape. This one in FScript because of this little piece of road here. Let's do that again. But yeah, these are random generators are meant to just give you some cool starting points and a neat little tool you'll be able to play with. Now, in the Steam version, the random map generator is in that version. I just sort of got the random town generator working last night, so I haven't published it to Steam yet, but that will be coming in the next few days whenever I put the next build up. And then, yeah, we have one more tool I've added. So this button here, the Export Map Image button. So I want to, let's do that with a slightly nicer looking map. So let's exit without saving. We'll go into Nils Hamlet. So this is what I drew up. You can see there's a lot going on, lots of different objects placed. We've got NPCs around. But let's say, though, you want to run this on a tabletop, or you just want to use Dungeon Maker as a map-making piece of software. Well, the Export Map Image will let you do that. It will export a PNG image of your map. So we just clicked it. Now, this isn't 100% done. Right now, all of them save under the one name, Save Map. In the exports folder of your application data is where it's going to save it, because that is a folder that Dungeon Maker can always write files to. So that way it doesn't run into any issues. So that's where it's going to save it. And let's open up the image we got, and there you are. Now, if you look, you can see, though, that the NPCs that were in the program, so there's one, the guy there, they're not shown. And I did that because NPCs, of course, can be moved, and I figure any Dungeon Master is going to be using tokens on a tabletop to represent them. So if the images were exported with the map, you then have to go into an image editor and remove them, or you have an NPC that can never move, or enemy. So it doesn't draw the NPCs or enemies, and it also doesn't draw in the Dungeon Master Utilities icon. So that's the little notebooks, the little starting position indicator that only the Dungeon Master can see, the lock icons on the door. Because, of course, if you're on tabletop, those are now not necessary. But yeah, you then have this image. Now you can see it goes a little bit larger than the actual map, because it's using the screenshotting ability of the camera to quickly take these pictures. That was much faster than trying to combine for each tile, trying to combine the different sprites there and create an image. I tried that. It was not working efficiently. So screen capping turned out to be the easiest. So the program here, if you watch it quickly, it gets rid of the UI, and then what it's doing, let it finish, is it also then changes the culling mask on the camera so that the NPCs and utilities are no longer visible to the camera. And then it flashes the camera to the different locations it needs to build up a full picture of your whole map. So in this case, we need to take something like 12 or 16 pictures. And then it combines them into a single image. But of course, that means there's a little extra space off the edge of it where, of course, the camera needed to move over here to get this last tile, and it has all its picture. So I'm still working on cropping the image. I have to put that in to crop it down. But that feature will be coming. And of course, I have to make it so that it saves under a unique name for each map, whether I decide that it's just going to save under the campaign name plus the map name, or whether it's going to save it as a custom name, so a dialog box can come up for you to fill in the name. Haven't decided which of those I'm going to do yet, but yeah, it's working pretty well, and this will allow you to then, you could print this map out and then use it on your tabletop games. So that's all the update I have today. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to check out Dungeon Maker on Steam, and add me on Patreon if you want to support my further development of this and other games in the future. Have a good one.